Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Graff, and I'm the editor-in-chief at National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler's webinar series sponsored by RDI Diamonds. Today's session is hosted by our senior editor, Ashley Davis, and features Elizabeth Potts of the Moonstone and Mia Graffam of Farewell Fine Jewelry. Before I turn it over to Ashley to get the webinar started, I just wanted to let attendees know that if they have a question, they can type it into the Zoom Q&A box. That is the box at the bottom of the screen with the two thought bubbles above it. I'll be back on at the end of the discussion to share the questions with Ashley, Mia, and Elizabeth. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website this coming Friday. Now I'll turn it over to Ashley and her guests. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to have Elizabeth and Mia here today. These ladies are uniquely poised at the intersection of a couple of interesting things that are happening right now in fine jewelry. The first is selling jewelry online, which is a trend that had already started, but has definitely been exacerbated by the pandemic. And secondly is a renewed interest in vintage and antique jewelry styles, which of course never go out of style, but I think we're seeing increased interest from new consumers and younger generations. So I'm so excited to get into this, and I would love to start just by talking a little bit about how you ladies got into your careers now and your overall professional backgrounds. Elizabeth, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thank you for having me. It feels really refreshing to have something to get kind of like excited and dolled up for, even if it's in my own house. But yeah, so I grew up in New Mexico in the Southwest, and I come from a family that's not very interested in jewelry at all. They're ranchers and teachers, and I first and foremost really fell in love with history. And growing up on a ranch, my grandfather would always pick up stones and shards of pottery and tell us a little bit about the history of the area. And then I remember when I was maybe 8 or 9, we went to a Zuni reservation on a school trip to help build some homes there and do painting. And I came across a coming of age ceremony for one of the young women there. And I got to sit with a bunch of the community elders and craftspeople who were making turquoise and silver jewelry. And I just remember at that point feeling like these things that we wear and these things that we put on our bodies really have meaning and intention. And that kind of started my whole love for wanting to know why people wore the things that they wore. And so I later went to school to become a benchsmith, so goldsmith and silversmith, and then started collecting vintage and antique and kind of fell in love with the history meeting the craftsmanship of it. And yeah, it was a really long road with a lot of really scary moments and mistakes and taking huge leaps and falling flat on my face. And here we are now. So.
Okay, amazing. And about when did you really pursue the Moonstones full time?
I think so the Moonstone has really been, I feel like, a full entity for maybe just about 4 years now. I launched it about 4 years ago.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. And what about you, Mia? What brought you into the jewelry world?
So basically, I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I left when I was about 19 years old, moved to New York City. I've been a professional tattooer for 11 years. And so I was doing that. And then, well, to backtrack, when I was growing up, my family had owned a fine jewelry store for like 25 years. It had been in the family. So as a kid, I would go to Beverly Hills to meet with my mom's diamond dealer, as a family trip, or go to New York trade shows and stuff. So I was always around it, and I really liked it. I don't think I appreciate it as much back then as I could have. In hindsight, oh, maybe I could have like learned more. I ended up working at my parents' jewelry store for like a brief time when I was like a young adult, and eventually pursued tattooing as a career. But then when I moved to New York, I met this girl, Allie, who's a really close friend of mine. And we decided, because we really liked antiquing and like vintage stuff, to start Farewell Trading, which was online on Etsy. And it was just like kind of a curated selection of like vintage and antique, like home decor. So we really focused on that. And then as time went on, like I started just more heavily collecting antique jewelry for myself. I liked it, started to like it, I guess, more in a sense than, buying like framed items or like, I don't know, like trivets. And I was like, oh, like this is so full circle, just because, my family was like really involved in all this, and not so much vintage and antique, but just like fine jewelry. And so it kind of translated into like me having like some sort of, I don't know, base knowledge of all these things, and then continuing to educate myself on just what I'm looking for, what different stones, like how can I tell these things, how can I test items, and it just grew from there. So I just transitioned maybe like 2 years ago, from selling like vintage and antique home goods to mostly selling jewelry. And my partner Allison, she basically just runs Farewell Trading, and I just branched off into Farewell Fine Jewelry. So that's how it happened.
And so you're currently operating your 2 tattoo parlors, plus the fine jewelry business, which is predominantly online, correct?
So I have 2 tattoo shops in Nashville that I own, and my husband owns them as well at this point. And, that's a lot of like dealing with people, hiring people. It's a whole like other world in and of itself that takes up a lot of time. Basically, every day that I'm not at work or like running the shop, I spend all of my time away from the shop focusing on selling jewelry online. So I don't usually have a day off ever, but I like it. So it's kind of like, my choice. Like I enjoy doing it so much that I don't really feel like I need to have a day off,
Yeah. And then I'm curious for both of you, if you could just talk a little bit about what kind of a role Instagram has played in your fine jewelry selling journey. For me, I would think that it would account for the majority of your business, or the majority of the traffic driven to your websites. So I'm just curious if that is the case, and kind of how Instagram has evolved since you've started.
Yeah, I mean, Instagram is a massive platform for sales, and I think that it's created a really special place where, I mean, in a lot of different ways. And number one, you can create this one-on-one story with your consumer, with your buyer. And so for me, it created a lot of opportunity to kind of pull someone into what I'm doing. So it's not just walking into a store and there's like glass boxes everywhere with jewelry and tags, and it feels kind of like white glove. And I feel like antique and vintage fine jewelry can sometimes feel a little stuffy and a little unattainable. And Instagram really created a space for me that I could kind of break that down and almost, hold your hand and bring you along. So I get to, one of my favorite things to do is when I'm going on like a treasure hunt, I get to kind of document the whole thing. And it's created a lot of these really special bonds and communication and storytelling with my consumer. And yeah, it's totally different than a what would otherwise be just a brick and mortar opportunity. And also, it has created a lot more transparency in sales, I feel like. And I think with the fine jewelry community has seen a lot of that huge shift, because you have these big box stores, like a Barney's, when before they died, they, it was all of a sudden the buyer really is aware of all that external cost, and being direct on Instagram, you get to cut out a lot of that cost. And then it just feels a lot more personal and attainable and fun. So I know for me, my sales and business is probably 90% Instagram. And then I've got a website that I manage as well. But yeah, it's a pretty fascinating tool for sure.
Yeah. What about you, Mia?
So I basically also use Instagram mainly to sell at this point. I think it was just easier and like more accessible for me at the beginning because I could like easily like throw something up, you know, in between doing other things and answer messages. But I agree with Elizabeth. It's like a very personal experience because you're directly talking to everyone and there's not like, I don't know, I feel like it is like more personal than just clicking add to cart on a website.
Right.
But that being said, I do think there is a huge value in a website as far as like time goes with like if you are dedicating so much time to selling on Instagram, you know, it does take a lot of physical time and effort to make those sales, right? Because you need to talk to the person about like the history of the piece and answer their questions and then have this conversation and kind of figure out like what form of payment are we doing? Where are we going from here? And I think having a website also and kind of like addition to Instagram feels like it would be really helpful. I'm working on mine now. It's up, but it's not like barely any inventories on it yet. But my goal is to kind of do that to like, you know, if you're not online at that moment, people can still browse what you have and still shop. And you don't have to physically be there for that every time. You know?
That's a really good point. And I'm glad you said that because I think sometimes people don't realize how much work it is. And, you know, to be, if you're not on Instagram and that's kind of the only platform you have, if you're not on there, you're not making any sales. And so it creates this real, I don't know, like limbo where you just you're scared not to get on because if you're not on, like, what about the algorithm? What about engagement? What if people forget about you? And these are like things that are always going on in my head. And I feel like having a website as well kind of takes away a lot of that weight. So if you're not on, or I want to spend a day with my daughter, or I want to focus on something else, or just not be glued to my fucking phone 24/7, then there's somewhere else where people can take their time and look through your inventory and get to be a little bit more familiar. Because not everyone is a gunshot kind of buyer, you know?
Yeah. And I think Instagram too, like a lot of people, like they don't really like using Instagram and like they do want that format that's like more of a traditional online sales format. And they can like kind of price shop between items and be like, okay, well, I like these 3 things, but what can I afford right now? What do I want? And so I feel like for them, it is easier, but then it's interesting because I decided to take a poll on Instagram asking people what they preferred. And it was interesting because most people were like, we want to see things on Instagram and we want like sales that happen quickly and instantly. And I was like, that's so interesting because I would have thought having a website was more convenient. Like I personally actually enjoy shopping a website more than I do an Instagram for me. But I think that's just what I've been used to for so long, right?
Right.
I'm not opposed to it. I buy things on Instagram all the time. Obviously, Elizabeth, I bought several things from you. So it's just funny because I think maybe it's like the audience that was honed by the platform and like the method in which I was selling for the last 2 years, like very like rapid fire, like sales of like, okay, here is what I'm selling. And then these people, and Elizabeth, you do this too, because your stuff goes really quickly. And I think, and sometimes I even feel bad because then people feel like they missed out. I think sometimes like, oh, well, maybe on a website, it's kind of like, it's all fair because it's all up there at one time. But a lot of people, I think, like the excitement of buying on Instagram, you know, like it's a fun thing for them.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've noticed that my, definitely like the people who shop on the Moonstone, it becomes yeah, it's really exciting. Like you're part of something that's bigger and you can be a part of it no matter where you are. And it's like this frenzy, this activity. It's like sexy and fun and exciting. And you're trying to like click through and see if it's sold and then backtrack and figure it out. And yeah, it does create a more addicting feeling, I think, for buyers, myself included.
Yeah.
I can imagine that having both of these mediums working together in conjunction could be really helpful. Like, I think that, you know, both of you talking about the importance of a website is just a really great tip for people listening, because I mean, at least you could direct people maybe for payment, you know, to the website, or just something to make it easier on the back end where you're not investing quite as much time. But I think that this is a really good segue into some tips and tricks for selling on the medium, you know, selling pieces to people that they have never touched in real life. Because I do think that there are some strategies that are really effective. Like, I have to say that sort of little endorphin rush of hunting the piece and looking, and oh, it's available now. And so, oh wait, I'm going to DM her and see if it's available. It gets you to buy quickly. It creates that, that sense of urgency to buy. And I think that's one of the great things about Instagram. And I do think that, for me, Elizabeth, I think that you are just kind of bar none. I mean, jewelry or just any kind of products being sold on Instagram at creating this really good kind of formula in which you share a piece on your stories. And as I keep clicking through each side, it's like more details about it, more details. She's talking about the story behind the piece. These beautiful videos, that's very key, because then I really feel like I'm seeing it almost on myself. And then the last slide, it's the price. And I'm like, okay, I have to see if it's available. And I think that this method, I mean, you know, we're all influenced by tons of people on Instagram and just in the world in general. But I think that this method has now become really popular among other jewelry sellers, that they're like, here you go, you know, it's this kind of these little teasers that then get you to shop. So I'd love to just talk more about like tips and tricks or things that you have found to be really essential to the sale.
Yeah, well, my mom is a second born of 10, and I have like 60 odd cousins. And growing up all together in a family like that, my grandfather had to find a lot of ways to entertain a lot of people. and so he had this way about getting us all together and telling a story, right? And I always remember, no matter what was going on or what we were playing or doing, something about him sitting down and telling a story was really captivating. And so when I think about sharing jewelry, these things that I'm really passionate about, I think about telling the story. Because especially in vintage and antique, it's emotional. A lot of these things were made in a time where nothing was mass produced and everything had real intention. And to be able to share that, I think is something that is important to spend time on. And, for anyone watching right now, if you're thinking about how to start a brand or how to get people involved, is you've got to find a way to really convey why you're doing it. If you're selling jewelry, if you're selling clothing, if you're selling dog treats, whatever it is, like really get in and think about why you're doing it. And if you're really honest and true about your process and you want to share it, then people will come and they'll be excited and they'll be emotionally invested. So I think for me, it became a real pleasure to start telling the story about these pieces and to let it unfold and to just pull someone along with me in the beauty of these pieces. And I definitely remember starting that. And very quickly, people were very excited about the unfolding of all of that.
What about you, Mia? What are some of your favorite tips and tricks, or just kind of your go-to best practices for sharing jewelry on Instagram?
So I think the most important thing, and I want to say, Elizabeth, you're very good at telling a story and like showing the beauty in every item, which I think is great. And I think it does draw people in. I definitely take a more pared down approach to it, a bit more straightforward. I guess because for me, maybe, I don't know why I don't do that, but I don't know if I'm like comfortable like writing a lot of like things that feel personal online. Like I'm more private in the way that I like present myself. I basically like want to let the jewelry, just be, these are the specs, this is what it is. And then I think the key with that though is like I'm choosing pieces that I love and I would wear myself. And I feel like so many times what I see now is when people start a page and they kind of mirror what they think people want, but what they don't realize is sometimes they're picking a version of that thing that people don't want, and they don't understand why, because they think to them it looks the same, but it's not. So I think if you want to present pieces and sell them in like a really, I don't know, like beautiful way, like yes, of course, like beautiful photos and videos and close-ups and information, like a lot of information's great, but I think the best thing to do is just be true to like what you're selling, like Elizabeth said. Like don't try to just jump on a bandwagon because you saw another successful seller selling this certain thing, because chances are like maybe the reason why it sold and it sold for the price it did is maybe it's French, maybe it's an antique and it's not a vintage repro, maybe, you know what I mean? There's so many factors that go into it that I think a lot of people like overlook, and they don't really understand why they're selling what they're selling.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's also really important for everyone to realize that there is just such a huge spectrum of how to have a presence on Instagram. And, like another one of my really favorite accounts is Parks Finds Group. Alex Parks, he sells diamonds, and he is just like no nonsense. He shows these really beautiful videos, and it's literally carats, carat weight, details, price. That's it. And he doesn't want to chit chat. And I appreciate him so much because, when I really want to get something, sometimes all I want is to just have the facts and to get it done and to make it that I feel really solid and good about. And so, there are what's going to work for me or what's going to work for Mia may not work for you as you're building a brand. And you've got to, like Mia said, like you've got to figure out what works for you, and don't try and imitate others, because it may not work for you if it's not true to how you want to present your brand and to present your jewelry.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I think it's great to learn from people, glean little tips and tricks, but then absolutely just experiment. Not everyone is going to have their own distinct voice right away. But if that's your goal, to develop something that feels like you, I think that's really key for absolutely any business. And one thing I will say that is non-negotiable in my opinion is just showing the jewelry on. So because you truly just cannot envision the scale of a piece. Otherwise, it could be so much bigger or larger. So I think that's really important. And like with Mia, the way that she'll, show pieces on her hand, and then she's this artist, so she has her tattoos. I mean, that in itself like lends this very special aesthetic where the jewelry looks young and fresh and modern, and not like a stuffy jewelry store. So that in itself kind of creates a distinct visual aesthetic, which I think is another great thing just to keep in mind, because that can be done so many different ways.
Totally.
But I would love to talk a little bit about what have you guys noticed with consumers during the pandemic? Did you see more sales? Were there ups and downs? I'm just curious kind of about consumer behaviors and what you've seen people buy this year.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been gangbusters. It's just the sales are and engagement is through the roof. And I think there's a couple different reasons for that. I think number one, we, because of the pandemic and because of the financial strain that it's putting on a lot of families, we decided to roll out a layaway program, which people are taking a lot of advantage of, and gives everyone something to look forward to without feeling like they have to just shell out thousands of dollars on something that is non-essential. Because if we're being real, it's non-essential. No one needs it. No one needs jewelry, but it is something that makes you feel really good. And in a time where, if you do have the means to make payments or to buy something outright, it's really important to do that and to celebrate yourself, right? And the other reason, I think, is because we're all at home, and if you're not at home, you should be at home, because you need to and flattening the curve. But yeah, so we're at home, and I think that we're all trying to find ways to engage with one another and be together. And one of the ways to do that is Instagram, whether you're buying or just watching or checking things out. So yeah, the Moonstones engagement has been pretty high on my end.
What about you, Mia?
I would say that I thought it was going to be the opposite, and I thought that no one would buy, right? So I also did something where I started offering layaway on any price. Before that, I would only offer layaway on anything 400 or more, and there was like limits to the timeline based on the price. So I kind of opened it up to be like, if you want to even buy like a tiny charm for $200, like, you don't have to pay me right away. Because I did feel bad. Like, I know a lot of people lost their jobs, and I was like, well, this is kind of awkward. Like, it is non-essential, like Elizabeth just said. So that kind of went on for like a few weeks. And then what I noticed is a lot of people that I'm assuming were working from home still with like tech jobs or stuff that they could do at home, like they did want to treat themselves, and they did want something to like make them feel happy, because everything was so unsure and uncertain. And my sales definitely were very high, I guess better than normal. I also have to account for the fact that I was available at home every day to like post all day long and have inventory to show. So
because your tattoo shops had to be closed.
Correct. Yeah. So I was, completely focused on jewelry for like months, and it was honestly amazing. I wish it was all the time, but but yeah, I think it was surprising that buying habits were, very like busy, and a lot of things were selling. I mean, I had to keep buying inventory constantly to like keep up with the demand. So
it's funny because a lot of times I just find myself as sort of the perfect example of a consumer in these scenarios, because despite the uncertainty, I found myself really needing that emotional purchase. Just sort of, it's like something to look forward to, and then I'm perusing, and that's sort of giving me something to do at home in the beginning of the pandemic especially, and I am feeling connected because I'm talking to all of these people on Instagram, and then getting something, and it's just was sort of like this kind of like optimistic, hopeful purchase, I guess. So I think that there has been a lot of that. And then we've seen with the price of gold going up, I mean, also people at least know it's not essential, but it retains value so much more than any other kind of purchase. That's, I think, so another way that we're able to justify these purchases.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I definitely was just thinking about that, like wanting to mention that, is that you are buying something that's an investment, but it does retain its value. And like in this uncertain time, I mean, you look at historically, like anytime there's like an economic crash, the gold price goes way up. So if you're buying even vintage and antique jewelry, which that's not a full retail market value, because it's used, you know? And so that honestly like gives people an opportunity to actually invest their money into something that is like kind of safe in a way. Whereas like if you have stocks, as they saw, it's like everyone was uncertain. And I know they've gone back up, but it's like gold, I feel like will always retain its value.
Are there certain items or certain periods, just any kind of trends that you've been noticing recently that people are buying?
For me, it's kind of been all over the place, and which is really fun because then I feel like people are telling me what they want and what they're feeling out right now, and so it can be anywhere from, you know, a really beautiful historical, you know, emerald ring with provenance and importance, and then it can be, you know, like today it was diamond tennis necklaces and bracelets. So it's kind of all over the gamut for me, which is fun because I feel like jewelry shouldn't be about trends. Personally, like, fuck a trend. Like, well, you know, like you need to feel important about being seen in some sort of piece. We're not going anywhere. So buy something that makes you feel really good, you know? And so I feel like my, you know, my consumers are really telling me what's making them feel really good. And that's a really fun thing to be a part of right now. So yeah, no trends for me.
Okay. What about you, Mia?
Yeah, so I feel like I've seen trends. I wouldn't say necessarily in like what I'm selling. I try to just sell things that I like and that I would wear. But I definitely see it when I'm like perusing Instagram. You know what I mean? I see the same thing over and over a lot, which is fine. You know, I get that there are a lot of trendy things right now. But yeah, it just depends. I mean, I've just been really into like charms lately, and I feel like I like to just get wild ones or like different ones that maybe I haven't seen before. And I'm like, I don't know, like it does make it more interesting because sometimes I even get bored with certain things.
Totally.
Like if I'm selling the same kind of like charm over and over, like the same kind of hoop earring, I'm like, okay, well, I'm like bored of photographing this stuff. Like I don't even want to wear it anymore. You know what I mean? Like I'd rather find something like weird and wonky and be like, oh, this thing's crazy. Like
You can get excited about it.
Yeah.
And like hunting for those weird specific things that's like the fun part. I mean, that's always been the fun part. It's like buying the jewelry, and before the pandemic, like going on road trips and like sourcing things. Like we would always drive from like Nashville, like back up to New York and like Pennsylvania and all these places specifically to buy. And it would be like a week-long trip and then come back. That was my favorite thing to do. And the selling is almost like, it's fun, but it's a little secondary to me. Like I like sourcing it and kind of curating like a collection of things that maybe this group of things that certain day that I bought, like all kind of go together in a weird way. Like it was whatever mood I was in when I bought it kind of thing. So I think it just depends. I would say, I don't know, like as far as trends go, like, yeah, there's some things that are trendy, like yellow gold's really hot right now. Hoops and I don't know, just like hearts are really trendy right now, I guess. I love a good heart, but it's just interesting that, again, so many things are like regurgitated online. And I feel like I would suggest to people to find like things that you just kind of like naturally are drawn to. And like other people will appreciate that too, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I do think, again, you know, back to what we were talking about is being really true to yourself and not copying anything going on. And, you know, when we're buying and selling things that make us feel really good and we can have some fun with it, then I feel like that really pulls in the audience to have some fun as well and not feel like it's false or performative or trying to like stick in this lane, like where everyone's going. Yeah. And especially with like vintage and antique, it's so fun and unique and wild and crazy. And yeah, Mia, you have an insane charm game and I love it. And yeah, it's fun to find things that are wacky and weird and to be able to share those, you know?
And I think a lot of it is educating the consumer. And I mean, this is what I like about Instagram. I mean, I think the challenge is how large and wide open it is, and what are you going to do to set yourself apart? But at the same time, it's just carte blanche to show whatever you want. And you know, you show your audience wearing something, and then suddenly I think it's cool because it looks amazing on you. You've piqued my interest, and now, you know, you have a following for that. So I really think that, you know, creativity can really open up different categories for your consumer. I am curious though, we'll have to, in a few minutes, we'll take questions, but with such a saturated marketplace, because Instagram is just so huge, how do you carve a niche for yourself? If I'm a business starting out selling any type of jewelry, or even let's say I'm someone who's an expert at selling at my brick and mortar store, and now of course I'm just trying to invest my time into beefing up my social media and online presence, how do I carve out my own space when it feels like the attention spans of people are so short and so occupied by other sellers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have a rule, a personal rule, that I never go on anyone else's pages. So I actually couldn't really tell you what other sellers or you know, vintage and antique dealers are doing, because I found when I was starting out, I always felt less than. I always felt like I was never going to attain this certain number, or a certain engagement, or like, what about my likes compared to this person? And I never felt good enough. And so I made that rule, I think maybe like 2 years ago, that I don't look at anyone else's page unless I'm like really going to, like, I go to Mia's page all the time, or like I've got a few others that I know I really enjoy what they have and it feels refreshing and exciting. So to carve out a niche for yourself, I just think, I don't know. I don't really have the answer, but I do know that if you're constantly comparing yourself to everyone else, you're never going to feel the freedom to find how you really want to express yourself. And, you know, my account, I don't have nearly as much followers or, you know, the number as some of the other people in my industry, but it doesn't really matter, because the followers that I do have, I really spend time with, and it feels authentic and exciting. And I have these really wonderful relationships that feel important to me. And so at the end of the day, I get to feel really amazing about the Moonstoned and what we're doing in my house, in my space. Don't waste time comparing yourself to others and worrying about how different you are. Just go out and do it, and you'll figure it out. Make some mistakes, get dirty, and you'll find out what works for you, you know, without having to compare yourself to others.
I think that's great advice. What do you think, Mia? What's your take on trying to just wiggle your way into Instagram?
So I definitely agree with Elizabeth in the sense of like not comparing yourself to others. I have never been concerned about who likes my photos and how many people follow me. Like, that doesn't matter to me. What matters is, are the people that are viewing my page engaged with what I'm selling? Are they customers, right? That's the most important thing, because that translates to sales. It doesn't matter if a bunch of people that will never buy jewelry follow you and you have a ton of followers. I think that the main thing is, if you're trying to carve something out, like, obviously, like, you do want to have something that's beautiful to look at. You want a good presentation. You need to put time and effort into something, and it doesn't happen overnight. I've had a lot of like other girls who started pages, who were clients of mine, actually reach out and message me and say, I'm feeling really discouraged. Like, I haven't really sold anything. Like, people are mean to me, or things like that. And I'm like, look, like, you have to just put yourself out there in an authentic way. stick with it, and also educate yourself. Like that's the number one thing. Like if you don't know what you're talking about, no one's going to take you seriously. If you don't have a passion for it, it's going to show through as maybe you're trying to make a quick buck. If you are a jeweler, you've been jeweler for years and you want to like jump on Instagram and try to grow your audience for your brick and mortar store, that's amazing. And you know what? You probably already have a leg up because people can tell the difference and tell if you're authentic and knowledgeable. And if you stand behind, you know, what you're even selling. So I think the main thing is to stick with it and stick with it in an authentic way and not worry about growing quickly, because if you stick with it consistently for years, like you will grow and you will sell. So if there's no magic formula to it.
I think consistency is a major point, and I know that it can be discouraging when you're just really starting that account, but to just post all the time, just keep it going. I think that's you won't see results immediately, but I think it's just really important to just invest that time. One last of my questions before we open it up for audience questions. At first I didn't even know if I should ask this because it's a little more personal rather than business related, but then I realized it's such an ever-present issue that affects all of us, especially the more time we spend online. I just wanted to ask how you guys separate your personal time from business time, because unlike leaving a jewelry store where you close at a certain hour and then you're back the next morning, you can always just pop back into your DMs, answer a question, respond to somebody. How do you set boundaries for yourself so that you're able to sustain this kind of business over time?
Yeah, well, it's so easy to be sucked into 24/7 because as soon as you have this device in your hand, you're connected to the entire world. And there is always someone who's going to want something from you. And I think I had a real, like a real hard awakening with it. With 2 years ago, I was working so hard to build a brand. I was launching my website, and I got really sick. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was constantly on my phone. I wasn't spending enough time with my family, with my friends, and yeah, I've never experienced anything like it. My body just freaked out, and yeah, I got really ill, and I had to take a step back and realize that I was focused on this thing that I just could not let go of. I just had this chokehold on Instagram and what I needed to post and do and interact with. And, you know, after that, I started to take baby steps back, but it was really hard to let go of. And now, since I have my daughter, I realized at the end of the day, I was trying to be a good mama and be a good business owner, and you cannot do both at the same time. And that's okay. And I had to step back and realize that I needed to set hours for myself. Like I wake up, have some time with my family, and then I work. And I have to work on that schedule with, my husband or, family, to make that work. And then when I'm done with work, I had to realize that the business isn't going to crumble down around my ears because someone has to wait 12 hours or 18 hours for an answer on a diamond ring. It's fine. People can wait. And if you are constantly worried about getting back on, you're going to miss so many really important things around you that give you the energy and fill your cup back up to be able to be back online. Because people want a lot from you online, and a lot. And so, yeah, create boundaries, stick to them. And it's really sexy and powerful to be able to say, that can wait. I'm going to get back to that later.
Amen.
Yeah.
Mia, you are balancing a lot between your multiple businesses, your family as well. Are there any kind of practices that you have for yourself?
So I will definitely admit that I had no boundaries to start out with, and I am still figuring out that like work-life balance. I've always taken work home for me my entire adult life. Even with tattooing, quick comparison, you know, there's homework involved. Like you have to come home and you need to draw for hours for the next day or the next week. Like you don't leave it at work. There's not, I don't know, there's not like a point of like rest and just fully removing yourself. You're stressed out about stuff all the time. So I guess I've been used to that for so long that like I definitely took that on with being online and answering messages. I mean, I would be in bed at 1 a.m. making a sale on Instagram.
Yep.
And my poor husband, right? I mean, he's awesome. He's supportive. He's like, you know, do what you need to do. But I feel bad because I feel like, or, you know, I definitely got to the point where I felt like I'm not spending enough time with my daughter. I'm not spending enough time with my husband. Like, we don't even sit down and eat dinner together anymore. Like, I'm eating and doing work, you know, packing orders at like 9 p.m. Like, there's no balance and there were no boundaries. So I had to really take a step back as well and be like, okay, if I don't post for like 3 days in a row, like, it's fine. Like, it's just Instagram. It's not going to like mean I'm never going to sell an item again. I was scared of that though, because, you know, it's obviously it's a job and it's a source of income that I do rely on. So you don't want your business to suffer, but at the same time, it's like, if you're one person and you're not like a jewelry company online that has like 20 employees that like pack orders, run social media. I mean, wouldn't that be nice? That sounds amazing. But in reality, you have to just be like, look, like family should come first. Your friends should come first. You should come first. And you can't do everything all the time without like suffering for it, honestly. And I think even, you know, your presentation might suffer because if you do get burnt out, like it does show through. Like you present things and maybe you're not even feeling it that day. And that's a huge thing. Sometimes when I'm not feeling it that day and I do put myself online and I am showing things, I might not sell any of those things. And when I wake up and I'm having like a good morning and I'm feeling inspired and I'm feeling ready to go, like I will sell every single thing I post throughout the whole day. It's weird. It's like people can pick up on that. They can sense like how you feel inside when you're putting your like energy out there, I guess. So I would say try to find a balance because you can't not have boundaries because it's honestly pretty bad.
I think that the reason that I ended up deciding it was important to ask was just because I think that this will only become a more important topic for not even people who sell things, just living your life with social media. And so I think these are things, the earlier that you can kind of establish those boundaries while remaining consistent and, you know, working on your business, I think the better set you will be for the long run, because we're only going to get more digital. New platforms will come and we'll be on those. And it's important to kind of establish some systems that work for you, even if you're just starting out. But you guys, thank you so much. This has been so great. And now we need to get some questions from the audience.
Okay, thanks, Ashley, me, and Elizabeth. That was an awesome discussion. And I think that last part, Ashley is right. That's not just advice for selling jewelry. That's advice for life. And that's advice for everybody right now, because everybody is at home, whereas Elizabeth pointed out, should be if you can. And you need to figure out how to end your workday, even if your computer is only in the next room. As a reminder, we've got a lot of great questions that came in, and I'm going to get as many as you can. As a reminder, you can still type questions into the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. While we compile the Q&A, I just wanted to say a quick word about RDI Diamonds. RDI Diamonds, the selection you want, the quality you need. Thousands of diamonds, that's just the beginning. RDI offers a wide range of services and support to help you succeed, from flexible memo options, a partnership with De Beers Group Industry Services, to generous stock options and cost-efficient shipping. RDI's goal is to provide the highest quality of both care and diamonds to your store. Visit rdidiamonds.com today to learn more, and that is rdidiamonds.com. Now let's get started with our listener question. The first question that I'm going to share is an interesting one that came in live while we were on the webinar, and it's how do you protect from fraud on Instagram, from payments that don't come through?
Yeah, I just had a really a really shitty experience. I get insurance for sure. If you're starting out, and even if you don't think you have a lot of, if you're holding a lot of stock, get insurance. I'm with Jewelers Mutual, and my agent's name is Minoshka. She's amazing. I'm happy to put you in touch with her. Just get insurance, because I had a situation a year ago where someone was buying from me, and they spent over $10,000, and then all of a sudden it was all flagged for fraud, and I had already shipped the stuff. And what are you going to do, right? That's one of the things about these platforms is there are people out there who are going to take advantage and scam you. Just be prepared. Have people who can get your back on it, so insure thyself for sure.
Okay, thank you. Mia, any thoughts on protecting against fraud?
Well, I had a weird experience myself, which I'm not going to go into too much, but it was just an interesting situation. It wasn't necessarily fraud, but it is something people will do, so be warned. Someone received an item from me, and it was a situation where they were just trying to get a discount on it, right? So they were like, this isn't, 18 karat gold. It was just something like petty. And I was like, it is, it's been tested. I even had her send it back and like had my jeweler test it. And he's like, it's 18 karat. And she like wouldn't budge. She actually tried to sue me. She tried to send lawyers to threaten me, and I had to get my lawyer involved. So it was very stressful and just unnecessary. And we're talking about something that was like under $1,000. Like it wasn't even really about the money. It was just, she had to be right. And she became very aggressive. So that was an interesting lesson, because people will do certain things like that, where they will just try to get money back. Like they just don't want to pay that much, or maybe they're trying to flip it and sell it, which is fine, but be upfront about it. Like if you're going to sell it, maybe you're going to get a dealer price instead of a retail price. And instead of doing that, people can be really shady. So I would just say, like, be very wary and like trust your gut, because I had like a weird feeling about her from the beginning, and it turned out like my instinct was right. Obviously you can't always know if people are like sending false payments and scamming you. Like there's no way that most people could even know what's going on until it's too late. But I would just say, just be like aware, like try to have an awareness of, what's the user like? Do they look like they're even a real person who's talking to you, like stuff like that online.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So we've had this question come through in a couple different versions. So I'm going to go ahead and ask it. What are your favorite ways to source vintage and antique jewelry? You talked about this a little bit, but it seems like we have a lot of people listening today who are interested to get in the business, but they want to make sure they're getting the real thing, right? So how are you finding the pieces that you're then selling on Instagram and on your websites?
I get asked this question a lot. Even
No need to give specific names.
Yeah, well, I get asked a lot, like, where do you find your jewelry? And I always kind of come back with like, I would have no job if I told you where. But I do think that reach out in the community and start local. I mean, I can remember, obviously things are different now, right? Because pandemic, but I remember before even going to like local little church sales where they were having, antique and vintage, or Brimfield's antiques. And what I would do is anywhere I was traveling, I made sure to just check out where the weird antique stores were, right? And then going and picking apart. It takes a lot of time to build inventory. So like and I I know it's probably similar for me. For every one piece that you see us sell, we've probably had to sort through 1,000 to find that one. So there's a lot of legwork that goes into it. And yeah, just research. When you find dealers that you trust, stick with them. It's like a line of gold there, literally. And stick in with them and let dealers know what you're looking for. You know, like I really pride myself on my relationships with the people I buy from. And over time, we've created a really great, we can communicate really well about what I like. So if they're finding things from their avenues and they see something and they're like, Elizabeth really loves this stuff, then immediately they come to me and I can find it. So that was a really long way of saying it takes a lot of time, and just start asking questions and getting out there and doing research. Ruby Lane is a great place to start to dive in. eBay, auction houses, and then just make relationships with people and see where that goes is my best advice now.
And I imagine that's where a lot of the learning comes in too, when you're new. So I think definitely embrace that process of even the estate sales, just here and there. Like, I'm sure you'll learn so much.
Right.
And Elizabeth, I think you made a great point too. We had a webinar a couple weeks ago at Suffragist Jewelry, and Kathy Calhoun, she's a jeweler in Pennsylvania, and she has a store out in Carmel, California that specializes in antiques. And she has her sources, and she always let them know that she was always looking for suffragist jewelry. So anytime a piece came in, they would say, Kathy, they just put it aside. Kathy will buy this. We know Kathy wants this, and
Right.
she's going to sell it in her store. And I think it's like jewelry in general. It's all about relationships, right? And there's no kind of one-stop shop. Like you just go to one place and the jewelry's just sitting there. It's a lot of lay work and a lot of developing things over time.
Yeah, it's, our business is a handshake business. It's your word is as good as what you're selling. And so just get in there and make those relationships and make yourself trustworthy and someone who other people want to work with and sell you jewelry at really great prices for.
And Mia, any secrets you want to share about where you source your jewelry?
I would basically just agree with Elizabeth on this, but I do have to say, like, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is a lot about personal relationships with other dealers and jewelers. And it is a lot of work. And for me personally, like I was saying before, I would travel very far and all over the country to find certain things. So I think that was kind of what you're presenting to a consumer is all the work that you put into finding something, and you're making it easily accessible for them. So they don't have to go through that. So they don't have to drive for like 3 days to the other side of the country and like meet with these dealers and source things. But yeah, that being said, obviously I can't reveal my specific sources, but what Elizabeth said about, hit like antique shows and shops and estate sales, like those are huge. That's a good way to start.
And we have a question here. And this is an educational question. I think it's an interesting one. Please define the difference among antique, estate, and vintage. Whoever wants to take that one.
Okay. Well, so with vintage stuff, it's like slightly newer. Antiques have to be over 100 years old. An estate basically just means that it's pre-owned. So if someone has an estate sale, essentially the items at that sale, it's because the owner of the estate either passed away, or it could be a living estate where they're just trying to downsize and like give up certain things that belong to them. So estate is just kind of a broad term, meaning that like it's not modern, but it's also, it could be like as new as like, the 90s or early 2000s. It just was pre-owned. So that's the difference.
Right.
And it's also so antique, just for everybody's knowledge, antique is always a shifting target. Like this year, things that were made in 1920 became antique. Then 1921. Exactly. It's always moving. It's not a set date. Do you ever see, and we have probably about time for this is the last question, but I think it's a good one. Do you ever see vintage jewelry going out of style? Do you think there's ever going to be a time when vintage antique jewelry, people are going to lose interest in it?
Nah, no. I think even more so, we're becoming so aware of our impact on the earth. It's too little too late, but hopefully we can make some super changes very, very quickly. But I think that now consumers are a lot smarter about what they're buying and the impact it has. And so I see vintage and antique only becoming more and more and more and more of a thing, and hopefully forever and always, because we really, really need to stop, pillaging from the earth for new things. Yeah, so I don't see vintage and antique going anywhere anytime soon.
Okay, Mia, thoughts on the staying power of vintage and antique?
100%. I think it's the definition of timeless. So you have things that have already survived the test of time. I don't ever see them going out of style. In fact, I think more people are going to realize how special they are, and be more drawn to that in the future.
Okay. Thank you both so much. And thank you so much, Ashley, for hosting. This was an amazing session. And I'm so sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we just had so many today and our panelists had so much to say. So I just want to wrap up. Thanks again to our panelists, and thanks again to our sponsor, RDI Diamonds. My next question is taking next week off due to the election here in the US, but we will be back on Tuesday, November 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'll be hosting that episode, and I'm reuniting with 3 retailers whom I first interviewed back in May: Holly Wesche, Chad Berg, and Elise Greenberg. And we're going to be talking about how the reopening of their stores has been going and what they expect for the holiday season. You can read more about that and register at nationaljeweler.com/webinars. And thank you very much again for being with us today, and please take care.
Thanks, everybody.